Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive today.
Oh.
We're going to be looking at something that's on every math teacher's mind,
Oh,
assessment.
yeah. Yeah.
And not just any assessment.
Right.
We're going to be diving deep into Chapter 13 of Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics, all about formative assessment,
Yes.
the kind that really guides how students learn.
What I really love about this chapter is how it flips the script on assessments. We often think of it as a one-way street.
Mm-hmm.
Teachers give grades, students receive them. This chapter is about making assessments a two-way tool, empowering students to understand where they are in their learning and where they need to head next.
I am so intrigued. I can already see how this could be like a game changer in my classroom.
Yeah.
I'm always looking for ways to get my students more invested in their own progress.
Exactly. The chapter uses this great analogy of navigating a ship.
Okay.
So to get where you want to go, you need more than just a destination in mind.
Right.
You need to know your starting point.
Yeah.
Have tools to guide you and figure out how to avoid getting lost along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Formative assessment, as this chapter describes it,
So
provides students with those navigational tools in their math journey.
I love that. So it's not just telling a student they got a problem wrong,
Right.
but showing them how to course correct their thinking.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's where this chapter gets really interesting. It introduces this concept of navigation instruments,
Okay.
visual tools that break down a unit of study into smaller, manageable subtopics and different levels of complexity.
I'm picturing something like a map with different routes marked for different levels of hikers.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Okay.
And the chapter actually gives us some specific examples in figures 13.1, 13.2, and 13.3,
Oh, awesome.
showing how these charts could work for different math concepts like repeating patterns, number patterns, and fractions.
So a student could look at this map and see, okay, I've got the basics of adding fractions down, but I'm still struggling with mixed numbers.
Yes.
Is that kind of the idea?
Yes. And what's brilliant about these navigation instruments is that they make the learning process visible.
Okay.
Students can see the big picture of the unit and pinpoint exactly where their understanding might be shaky.
And the chapter actually shares a story about this, right? With
Yeah.
Wall Angel and Colleen
Yes.
on page 241.
Yes. That anecdote beautifully illustrates how these visual tools can empower students. These students were using the instruments and suddenly they had this aha moment,
Right.
realizing they understood what they were learning in a whole new way.
I love those aha moments. It makes all the difference.
Absolutely. And the book points out that sometimes even when we give students feedback, they don't fully grasp it
Mm-hmm.
because our understanding as teachers is often much richer than theirs.
Right.
These navigation instruments act as a bridge, breaking down the learning into smaller pieces that students can really grasp.
So it's not just about the information itself, but how it's presented.
Exactly. It's like giving them the key to unlock the meaning behind the feedback.
This is all making a lot of sense.
Mhm.
I'm already thinking about how I can adapt this for my own classes.
Yeah,
But before we get into that, the practical side of things,
sure.
there's something else that jumped out at me from the chapter. The book suggests using terms like novice, emergent, and expert
Yes.
instead of the usual basic, intermediate, and advanced.
Yes.
Why this shift in language?
It's subtle but powerful. Think about it. Terms like basic can feel fixed, almost like a label.
Right.
These new terms, on the other hand, focus on the student's abilities and emphasize the idea that everyone is on a learning journey.
Yeah.
They are a novice now,
Okay.
but with effort and practice, they can become emergent and eventually an expert.
So it's less about judging their current level and more about encouraging growth.
Exactly. And the book shares an example of students who were hesitant to try problems beyond the basic level.
Yeah.
But when those same problems were framed as moving from novice to expert,
Okay.
they were more willing to challenge themselves.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if just this simple language tweak could make a big difference in how my students approach learning. I'm already itching to try it out.
Me too.
But I'm also thinking, how do these navigation instruments actually work in the classroom?
Well, the chapter highlights several ways teachers can use them.
Okay.
For example, students can use them for self-assessment, tracking
Yeah.
their own progress, and pinpointing areas they need to focus on.
So they're not just waiting for me to tell them what they need to work on.
Yeah.
They're actively figuring it out themselves.
Exactly.
I love that.
And teachers can use them for quick checks, for understanding during a lesson,
Right.
or even as a tool for continuous improvement throughout a unit.
It sounds like this could be a game changer for how we approach review
Yeah.
and helping students see their progress over time, not just as a final grade at the end of a unit.
Exactly. It shifts assessment from a judgment of ability to a tool for growth and improvement. And what's really intriguing is that the chapter raises a question that it doesn't explicitly answer.
Ooh, I do love a good mystery. What is the question?
It asks if breaking down a unit into subtopics is so helpful for students. Should we even teach an overall learning goal for the unit?
Wow, that's a really thought-provoking question.
It definitely challenges us to think about how we balance helping students master those smaller pieces while also ensuring they understand the big picture.
My mind is already buzzing with possibilities. This has been incredibly helpful. But I'm curious.
Yeah.
What are those students who just don't seem to care about their learning?
That's a great question, and the chapter does address it. And it's not as simple as saying they're just lazy or unmotivated.
Right.
There's often something deeper going on. And sometimes the way we traditionally approach assessment might actually be part of the problem.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into that.
Let's explore those challenges and strategies in the next part of our deep dive. One of the things that really resonated with me in this chapter was the emphasis on how we communicate information to students during assessment.
Okay.
It's not just what feedback we give, but how we present it that can make all the difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've had those moments where I thought I was being like crystal clear with my feedback, only to find out my students were totally lost. It's like we're speaking different languages sometimes.
Exactly. The chapter uses this analogy of encrypted feedback,
Okay.
comparing it to giving students a coded message without the key to decipher it.
Right.
They see the corrections, the comments, but they don't know what to do with that information.
So are you saying that these navigation instruments act as the decoder ring?
Precisely, because the navigation instruments are visually organized,
Okay.
breaking down the unit into subtopics and those different novice to expert levels.
Right.
Students can see precisely where they are strong and where they need more practice. It takes the guesswork out of understanding the feedback.
And that's where those symbols the book talks about come in, right?
Yes.
The check marks, the squiggly lines, the N for not attempted.
Yes. Those symbols provide another layer of clarity. Students can see not only what they got right or wrong, but how they approached the problem. Did they make a careless mistake?
Oh,
Did they try it independently or get help? This nuanced information is incredibly valuable for both the student and the teacher.
I've struggled with getting my students to really engage in self-assessment.
Yeah.
It often feels like they just go through the motions or wait for me to tell them how they're doing.
Right.
Does the chapter offer any insights into that?
It absolutely does. And it acknowledges that traditional self-assessment based solely on students' opinions of their abilities has limitations.
Okay.
Those opinions might not be accurate and can be swayed by their confidence levels.
So how do we make self-assessment more meaningful then?
That's where these navigation instruments really shine. Because they're based on data, not just feelings.
Right.
They offer a more objective foundation for self-reflection.
Okay.
Students can see their progress over time, which can be very motivating.
So instead of just saying, I think I understand fractions,
Yeah.
they can look at the instrument and say, I've mastered adding and subtracting proper fractions, but I need to work on multiplying mixed numbers.
Exactly. It becomes much more concrete and actionable. And this is what makes this approach so powerful. It shifts assessment from being a judgment of ability to a tool for growth and improvement.
As we've been talking about these instruments for individual units,
Yeah.
it made me wonder about the bigger picture.
Okay.
How do we ensure students are making connections between units and seeing how their learning progresses throughout the year?
That's a fantastic question, and the book addresses it head-on. It argues that for students to see the connections between different math topics, they first need to understand how those topics are broken down into smaller pieces, those subtopics we've been discussing.
So it's like we can't just throw a whole bunch of concepts at them
Right.
and expect them to magically see how it all fits together.
Right. The chapter uses fractions as an example.
Okay.
There are so many subtopics within fractions. Adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing proper fractions, mixed numbers, and on and on.
Yeah.
Students need to master those individual pieces before they can fully grasp the concept of fractions as a whole.
And the navigation instruments help by providing that clear roadmap of how each subtopic fits into the overall unit.
Yes. And what's fascinating is that the book argues that by focusing on those subtopics first, students actually develop a deeper understanding of the connections between them. They begin to see how the skills they're learning build upon each other.
Instead of just memorizing a bunch of isolated procedures, they're developing a deeper, more conceptual understanding of math. I love that.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's a great reminder for us as teachers that sometimes We need to break things down
Right.
before we can build them back up in a more meaningful way.
This is all so helpful, but I do have a couple of lingering questions.
Okay, what are they?
Well, first, the book talks about using those new headings for complexity levels:
Yeah.
novice, emergent, and expert, instead of the typical basic, intermediate, and advanced.
Yes.
I get the reasoning behind it,
Mm-hmm.
but how do students actually respond to those terms?
That's a great question, and the book actually shares some interesting research findings on this.
Okay.
It turns out those seemingly subtle shifts in language can make a huge difference in student motivation and engagement.
Really?
Tell me more.
Research has shown that using terms like basic, intermediate, and advanced
Okay.
often makes students feel like they're being labeled or judged
Right.
based on the difficulty level of the task.
Yes. It can feel very limiting, like they're stuck in a specific category.
Exactly.
Right.
But when we use terms like novice, emergent, and expert,
It shifts the focus to the learner's abilities and emphasizes that learning is a journey.
yeah,
So instead of saying, I'm stuck at the basic level,
right.
a student might say, I'm a novice now, but I'm working towards becoming an emergent learner. It feels so much more empowering.
Exactly. And the research found that students were more willing to challenge themselves and take risks when they viewed their learning in terms of growth
Yes.
rather than fixed stability levels.
That makes so much sense.
It really does reframe the entire learning experience.
And what's even more interesting is that the book highlights how these terms can be especially impactful
Okay.
for students who haven't traditionally seen themselves as good at math.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
Being called a novice might be a lot more encouraging than being labeled basic
Exactly.
if you've always struggled.
Absolutely. It opens up the possibility for growth and reminds students that everyone starts somewhere.
I'm definitely going to experiment with using these new terms in my classroom and see how my students respond.
I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by the shift in mindset it can create.
Okay, I have one more question that's been bugging me.
Okay, fire away.
The chapter talks a lot about breaking down units into subtopics
Yeah.
and using the navigation instruments to track progress on those smaller chunks.
Right.
But when do we bring it all back together
Okay.
and help students see the bigger picture of the unit as a whole?
Another excellent question. And the book addresses this in a really insightful way. It suggests that we need to be careful about when and how we introduce the overall learning goal for the unit.
Why is that? Wouldn't it make sense to start with the big goal so they know what they're working towards?
While that seems logical, presenting the overarching goal too early can actually overwhelm or discourage students,
Okay.
especially if they don't immediately grasp it. They might fixate on the parts they don't understand
Right.
and lose sight of the overall learning journey.
I see. It's like we need to let them explore the individual pieces, build their confidence and understanding, and then gradually reveal how those pieces fit together into that larger whole.
Precisely. The chapter makes an interesting point that the names of concepts and learning goals should come after students have had experiences with those concepts. It's about letting understanding emerge from experience
Okay.
rather than imposing it from the start.
That's a really powerful idea.
Yeah.
It makes me realize how often we rush to give names and labels to things
Yes.
before students have had the chance to wrestle with the ideas behind them.
And when we do that, we might unintentionally limit their understanding. It's like giving them the answer before they've even had a chance to ask the question.
This has been so insightful. It's completely changed how I think about formative assessment.
Yeah.
It's not just about grades or checking from understanding.
Right.
It's about empowering students to take ownership of their learning and giving them the tools to navigate their journey.
And for us as teachers, it's about embracing assessment as a powerful tool.
Right.
To inform our instruction, differentiate our teaching, and ultimately create those engaging and effective learning experiences for all students.
I'm feeling inspired and ready to put these ideas into practice.
Oh.
I do have to admit, though, I'm still wondering how to address those students who just don't seem motivated to learn.
Oh, let's tackle that challenge and explore some strategies in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've been talking about all these incredible tools and strategies for formative assessment.
Yeah.
And I'm already feeling inspired to try them out in my classroom.
Great.
But there's one thing that's still nagging at me. What about those students who just don't seem to care about their learning? The ones who are content to just coast by and don't seem motivated to push themselves.
That's a challenge every teacher faces, and it can be incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
But the good news is that this chapter
Okay.
offers some really valuable insights into how we can reach those students.
Okay.
And it starts by recognizing that not all students are intrinsically motivated to learn,
Right.
and some might even resist our best efforts to engage them.
That's for sure. I've definitely encountered my fair share of those students.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, does the chapter offer any specific advice on how to actually change their attitudes?
It does. And one key takeaway is the importance of distinguishing between students who are unable to achieve and those who are unwilling.
Okay, I can see how that distinction is important.
Yeah.
But how do we figure out which is which?
That's where careful observation and formative assessment data come in. By closely monitoring student work and using tools like the navigation instruments,
Okay.
we can begin to see patterns in their effort and performance.
So if a student is consistently not attempting work or showing minimal effort, that might be a sign that they're not trying
Exactly.
rather than not understanding.
And once we've identified those students who are choosing not to engage,
Right.
we can start addressing their lack of motivation in a more targeted way.
Okay.
The chapter suggests focusing on building relationships with those students, understanding their individual needs and interests, and finding ways to make the learning relevant to their lives.
I think that's such a critical point.
Yeah.
It's easy to get frustrated with those students
Yeah.
and assume they just don't care.
Yeah.
But like you said, there's often something more going on beneath the surface.
Absolutely. Sometimes just showing those students that we care about them and believe in their potential can be incredibly motivating. It's about connecting with them on a human level
Right.
and helping them see the value in what they're learning.
I'm already thinking about some of my students who fit this profile, and I'm feeling more hopeful about reaching them.
That's great.
But I also have to admit, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by the idea of creating these navigation instruments for my own classroom.
Yeah.
The examples in the book are great, but every teacher has their own curriculum and teaching style.
Right.
Where do I even begin?
I understand. It can feel daunting, but the chapter actually highlights how valuable the process of creating these instruments can be for teachers.
Ah.
It forces us to really think deeply about the content we're teaching, the learning goals we're aiming for, and the progression of skills within a unit. It's like taking our curriculum apart and examining it under a microscope.
So even if the final product looks different for each teacher, the process itself leads to a richer understanding of our own teaching.
Exactly. And the chapter offers some helpful tips for getting started.
Okay.
It suggests starting with your curriculum documents and identifying the key learning outcomes for the unit.
And then you would break those outcomes down into smaller subtopics and consider the different levels of complexity within each subtopic, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the book encourages teachers to be creative and use whatever format works best for them and their students.
Okay.
It could be a chart, a table, a list, or even a visual representation. The key is to find a way to make the learning progression clear and accessible to students.
I appreciate that flexibility. It gives teachers the freedom to make it their own.
Yeah.
But it also sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah.
Any advice on making the process more manageable?
Absolutely. Don't forget the power of collaboration. If you're teaching the same grade level or subject area as other teachers, why not team up and create these instruments together?
Right.
You can share ideas, resources, and support each other along the way.
That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
It would not only make the process less overwhelming, but also more fun.
Right.
And who knows, we might even discover some new insights about our curriculum or our teaching that we wouldn't have found on our own.
Exactly. Collaboration can be such a powerful tool for professional growth.
Well, I think it's safe to say that this deep dive has completely transformed the way I think about formative assessment.
That's great to hear.
It's not just about giving grades or checking for understanding. It's about empowering students to take ownership of their learning and giving them the tools to navigate their journey.
And for us as teachers, it's about embracing assessment as a powerful ally, guiding our instruction, helping us differentiate our teaching,
Right.
and ultimately creating more engaging and effective learning experiences for all of our students.
I'm so excited to put these ideas into action. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with me into this amazing chapter.
Those are my pleasure.
It's been incredibly enlightening. And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
We hope you found it as thought-provoking and insightful as we did. Until next time, keep thinking and keep learning.